show about nothing. I mean, most TV is about nothing. At least this show is honest about it, you know? And now there's going to be some show which pretends to be about something, but it'll be really about nothing, and what are we going to do?
So you will miss Seinfeld?
Yes.
Good evening. For a show about nothing, it's getting quite a farewell.
Indeed it is. From their living rooms to Times Square to parties all around New York City, people said goodbye to four lovable neurotics who have given us 9 years of laughter. After all the hype, tonight was the night that Seinfeld signed off.
There are few shows that had the cultural relevance that Seinfeld had during its unprecedented run in the 90s. Now, don't get me wrong, there are shows that held cultural relevance before Seinfeld. There were ads taken out for Dallas after the cliffhanger of season 3, questioning who shot JR. I Love Lucy dominated 4 out of its 6 seasons as the uncontested king of Nielsen ratings, even ending its run at the top, which was a first for the time. Cheers, NBC's other sitcom giant of the late 80s and early 90s, had racked up an absurd 117 primetime Emmy nominations by the time the show ended in 1993. Yeah, there were shows that people cared about for sure, but not really like Seinfeld. By the time Seinfeld ended its 9-season run in 1998, it had become a juggernaut. The show ranked within the top 3 in Nielsen ratings every season for its final 5 seasons. The finale for the show became the 4th most watched series finale of all time, and 30-second ads were being charged $1 million, which was the highest ever charged for a non-sporting event in television history. TV Land even shut off their channel for the event with a static screen being broadcast opposite of the finale saying, "We're TV fans, so we're watching the last episode of Seinfeld. We'll return at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific." Seinfeld was a juggernaut of pop culture in the 90s, which makes it a little funny and a little strange for me to say that I didn't fall in love with Seinfeld until 2006, almost a decade after the show had gone off the air. The landscape of network television in the mid-2000s was a literal nightmare. With only a handful of exceptions, there weren't really any interesting shows making their mark on the small screen. Instead, there was a glut of reality TV shows. Shows like American Idol, Big Brother, The Bachelorette, Survivor, The Amazing Race, Hell's Kitchen, America's Next Top Model, Wife Swap, The Simple Life with Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie, Extreme Makeover Home Edition, and whatever the hell this is.
I just don't want people to notice me. I don't want people to see me. I've got hair. I feel completely unbearably disgusted with myself.
It makes me feel really unfeminine to have to shave my face every single day.
My biggest fear is probably being alone, not having any friends. I'd give anything to not want to be invisible.
I can't wait to see her. Here she is, the brand new Marcia Medelberg.
Prestige television was also beginning to rear its head, with The Sopranos coming to a close, The Wire and The Shield having a fantastic run until ending in 2008, and shows like Deadwood and 6 Feet Under garnering critical acclaim. Cable television was finally beginning to showcase that the small screen was a viable place for telling amazing stories with cinematic aspirations, even though it had its own problem with an insane array of its own trash TV.
Really want to say, like, let's go back, let the past be the past. That would make me so happy because that's all I want.
As a person who grew up with TV and loved cinema, the reality shows bored me, and I didn't have access to the good shit that HBO was putting out. Enter a quirky comedy on the Fox network called Arrested Development. Arrested Development was a comedy unlike anything I had ever seen. The show was a satire aimed directly at the rich Enron types of the world, unlike the usually well-to-do middle-class or even lower-class families of many sitcoms. It was shot in an almost pseudo-documentary style, filming with multiple, usually handheld cameras in real locations, instead of the confines of a set with static cameras. The humor employed cutaway gags, an insane amount of clever puns, and some of the funniest visual comedy to grace television sets. Yes, Arrested Development was a special show that brought tons of joy to many, until it had its final season episode count cut to only 13 episodes in November of 2005 and was not renewed for another season by Fox. This was a blow for me as a fan. While many people were looking forward to the results of each week's American Idol results, I was looking forward to the various hijinks of the Bluth family. And despite some rumors on the still burgeoning internet, no network change or even movie ever happened. While this may seem like a weird tangent considering where I left off with the Seinfeld talk, I can assure you that it isn't. See, in 2006 I was working my first job at a grocery store, and it was there that I met a friend who we'll call Stanley. Stanley was slightly older than me and had grown up in a very different home than the one I had. He had had different experiences than me, and even still, we liked enough of the same things to have good conversations that weren't entirely superficial. So it was one day while hanging out after work that he said something that I didn't understand, and he couldn't believe it. "What do you mean you don't know what Kramerica Industries is? Haven't you ever seen Seinfeld?" And when I replied no, he gave me the task of watching Seinfeld and reporting back to him. It only took a handful of episodes and I was immediately hooked. Seinfeld, much like Arrested Development, was unlike all of the other sitcoms I had experienced at the time. The characters weren't all a family, they were mostly well-to-do single New Yorkers. The show wasn't interested in teaching valuable moral lessons, it was interested in making you laugh. Probably most importantly though, it wasn't written lazily with jokes and situations that had been used repeatedly in other shows. No, Seinfeld was written so intelligently that I was floored by it. So why do I bring up these two shows in the same breath? They couldn't be more different, right? One is a multi-camera sitcom shot on a soundstage made to look like New York. The other is a sitcom shot like a documentary in real places in Orange County. One is about a small group of friends, the other about a dense family unit. One is pointedly satirizing wealthy types, and the other is, well, a show about nothing. While all of that may be true, I think that when we look at the fundamentals that make both shows often brought up in the greatest sitcoms of all time discussion, one thing about both shows stands out: the writing. And what's more, I think that these two shows are way more alike than the quick sideways glance would have you believe. So strap in and prepare yourself, because we're about to talk about the similarities between Seinfeld and Arrested Development, and what makes them the two greatest sitcoms of all time. Before we get started, I feel like I should explain that Arrested Development and Seinfeld are indeed very different shows. This is not a one-to-one comparison, nor am I trying to make it out as it is. More so, I see the many similarities in the writing of the shows that explain why I think they're so incredible. So let's first talk about what a sitcom even is. Sitcom is short for situational comedy, which has probably the blandest definition ever. A television or radio comedy series that involves a continuing cast of characters in a succession of episodes. To boil this down, it basically means a comedy set within a situation. Typically, what this will entail is that the recurring cast will deal with a new situation every episode without an overarching change or development to the characters. This is probably best exemplified in shows like South Park, The Simpsons, and Family Guy, but can be seen in other sitcoms as well. Sitcoms also usually revolve around only a handful of locations, with one tending to be the primary focus of the show. As an example, Parks and Rec, although moving around various spots in the fictional town of Pawnee, Indiana, is a workplace sitcom set in the city government. And finally, sitcoms tend to involve an ensemble cast of characters that play off one another in interesting ways. This ensemble will be the source of comedy coming from any given situation within each episode. Many, if not all, sitcoms adhere to these tenets, and Seinfeld and Arrested Development are no different. Both shows tend to have their characters end up in the exact same position at the end of every episode. They both are set in a handful of locations, and both derive most of their comedy from their characters. Where these two differ from the vast majority of other sitcoms, however, is in just how they manage to not only adhere to these rules, but also break the other seemingly endless trappings that other sitcoms fall prey to. The most immediate example of this is in the plots. Arrested Development and Seinfeld both have some of the most intricate plotting in their scripts of any sitcom out there, and yet they somehow come together in a completely coherent way. For comparison's sake, let's take a look at a typical sitcom. We'll use Friends as an example. And just for the sake of having a good faith argument, let's take a look at arguably Friends' best episode, the one with the embryos. In most Friends episodes, there are 2 or 3 plot lines that mostly stay on their set tracks and rarely interact with the other plot lines. In the one with the embryos, this is no different. The episode begins with the inciting incident for the A story in which Monica and Joey are arguing over who knows who better. This boils over into an argument about whether the duos of Joey and Chandler or Monica and Rachel know the other pairing better, and soon a bet is placed. A game show is formed to determine the winner of the bet, stakes are raised, and ultimately, Joey and Chandler are crowned victors. Interspersed between scenes of this A plot playing out are scenes of the B plot. In this plot line, Phoebe goes to the hospital to begin the process for carrying her brother's fertilized embryos as a surrogate. The two narratives stay on separate tracks until the final moments where they come together for a very brief moment as the episode is ending. The same format can be found in some of the other best episodes of Friends, such as Season 5's The One With All the Resolutions, or Season 3's The One with the Football. And a vast majority of sitcoms follow this formula, but not Arrested Development or Seinfeld. While both shows had their fair share of just A and B storylines, oftentimes the shows would deal in A, B, C, D, E, and even F storylines. Those storylines would intersect and fold in on one another in hilarious ways. Let's take arguably the best episode of Seinfeld as a case study, Season 4, Episode 11's The Contest. The episode begins with George recounting the story of how his mother caught him.
My mother caught me.
Caught you? Doing what?
You know. I was alone.
Which leads to him exclaiming,
All right, I'll tell you this stuff. I am never doing that again.
What? You mean in your mother's house or all together?
All together.
This, of course, sets the events of the contest in motion. From here, 4 separate storylines, all involving the characters and some sort of sexual events happening, play out. Jerry is dating a virgin who doesn't want things to progress to sex. Kramer becomes obsessed with the woman across from Jerry's apartment that walks around naked. George's visit to the hospital to see his mom ends up with him witnessing a beautiful nurse giving a beautiful patient a sponge bath. And finally, Elaine strikes up a conversation with John F. Kennedy Jr. after he shows up in her exercise class. These various plot lines intersect on and off until finally they all meet in the final act in an explosive manner. Jerry is set to have sex with Marla when an offhanded remark sets her off, and she storms out of the apartment, only to find Elaine waiting outside for JFK Jr. to pick her up. Marla scolds her, leaving Elaine to wander up to Jerry's apartment after she assumes that Kennedy is a no-show, only to have George enter the apartment and tell her that he saw Marla being consoled by John before they drove away. Jerry moves to the window only to see that Kramer has finally made his way into the apartment of the naked woman across the street. All throughout the episode, the various plots intersect and develop new threads that all lead into an ending that manages to tie all of the threads together in a hilarious manner. Arrested Development does the same exact thing. Take the hysterical Season 2 episode Afternoon Delight as an example. The episode is built around the concept of a company Christmas party, and that party being able to bring everyone together. This is the catalyst for all the stories to run through. By my count, there are 8 separate storylines going on at any one given point. Now, these individual plots vary in screen time, but all have beginnings, middles, and ends. What's fascinating to watch, however, is how each storyline not only overlaps with the other storylines, but in turn affects them. Michael wanting to have fun with his son at the Christmas party is interrupted by George Michael's desire to be with his girlfriend, Anne. Anne's family's weird holiday traditions give George Michael a reason to check in on his dad at the Christmas party, and he finds that Michael has sort of replaced him with maybe. This leads to both his and Lindsay's feelings of jealousy, which in turn leads to their act of revenge in the finale. And this is just two of the plot lines crossing over. Just look at any given scene will show you how these various plot lines are colliding and being sent into different directions. There's Michael and Maybes running into Oscar at a gas station that in turn pushes Lucille's story in a different path. There's Tobias's misreading of a telephone call and thus bluing himself that carries his story in a different direction. The whole episode and almost every single other episode of the show is set up like a Rube Goldberg machine that sets up hundreds of little dominoes that are knocked over one by one. Then we get to the final 5 minutes of the episodes and every separate storyline converges to one point, creating an incredibly funny and satisfying finale. Now, there isn't anything inherently wrong with the way that normal sitcom plots tend to operate. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that the linear nature that most of their plots tend towards make the stories that they're trying to tell a little bit more accessible. It also makes the episodes where they deviate from the structure stand out, with some of those episodes being the best episodes in the show's entire run. This just so happens to be the case with almost every single episode of Seinfeld and Arrested Development. In the context of what their peers were doing at the time, both of the shows stood out like sore thumbs with their intricate plotting. Only in this case, the thumb wasn't so much sore as it was dipped in solid gold. Of course, none of these plotlines would really work without the characters able to pull this off. As we talked about before, in sitcoms, the comedy always comes from the characters and how they deal with the situations that they are presented with. What's important here is that your sitcom has to have characters that will respond to the same situation differently. This diversity in characters is easy enough to design, but there's a couple of things that many sitcoms tend towards that make them all feel relatively samey. Let's go back to the example of Friends for just a moment. Take a look at the character of Joey. Joey is, at his essence, a serial playboy with the heart of gold, an ever so slight twist on the hooker with the heart of gold cliche. Or how about Rachel? Rachel is the privileged daddy's girl who becomes an independent woman through her own moxie. I've maybe beaten Friends a little too harshly, so let's take a look at another popular sitcom, this time from the mid-2000s. Let's take a look at 2.5 Men. Charlie, the main character, falls into, yet again, the playboy with a heart of gold trope. Or what if we take a look at How I Met Your Mother? Robin is the girl who is, quote, just one of the guys. And this isn't to say these characters don't have nuance to them, they surely do. It's more so to point out that sitcoms lean and have leaned heavily into these sorts of archetypes for their characters. While Seinfeld and Arrested Development had their own sort of pod of stock characters that they would pull from, that was mostly relegated to the side characters. The main characters rarely devolved into cliche, and even when they came across as such, like in the case of Buster in Arrested Development, it was often in service to satire. Buster's mother's boy man-child tendencies are an extreme look at helicopter parenting and its lasting effects. Even if we want to table the conversation on archetypical characters because both shows utilize them to varying degrees, there is yet another way in which the cast of characters in Arrested Development and Seinfeld both separate themselves from the typical sitcom. And that is in how their characters operate outside of the moralistic structures of many sitcoms. It's no real secret that there was a sort of rule instituted by Larry David in the writer's room of Seinfeld. This rule was basically boiled down to the phrase, no hugging, no learning. And while it was kind of a joke, it was also kind of a clear countercultural mantra that the show would epitomize for its entire run. The sitcoms during the 80s and leading into the 90s were usually based around the upper middle class family, and every episode would feature a character going through some sort of plot that would ultimately teach them a lesson or some sort of moral. Look at any episode of Family Matters, Full House, or The Cosby Show, which, quick side note, seems almost like a sinister joke now given the context of Cosby's behavior, and you can see a very clear pattern of what was going on here. The majority of sitcoms of this era were almost bland and sugary sweet with their depictions of American family values. All of the characters of these sitcoms would never be outright bad, and instead would be completely ignorant of their small acts of evil, and over the course of an episode would learn the error of their ways and grow from it. This is something that Seinfeld would actively fight against. In Seinfeld, all of the characters lacked any real moral fiber, instead being mostly self-absorbed neurotic individuals and never changing beyond that. Take for instance the character of Elaine Bennis. Elaine is overly reactive and incredibly selfish. These traits often lead to her relationships, romantic or otherwise, dissolving quickly or getting her in trouble in other ways. Jerry Seinfeld's self-titled character often operated in much the same way. His selfishness and vanity often got himself into situations that would prove untenable and would work only to hurt him and others around him. Both of these characters would have done well to have learned from these mistakes and grow as people, but this would never turn out to be the case. Arrested Development works in much the same manner. While most of the characters in Arrested Development are a little more well-meaning than the awful people that made up the cast of Seinfeld, they too would never really move much further than their original starting positions within the show. Take a look at Lucille Bluth as an example. Lucille starts out as a cold, condescending, and extremely manipulative woman, and when all is said and done, she is the exact same. Or let's take a look at Michael Bluth. Every episode of Arrested Development has a little bit of heart to it, but Michael, despite learning some things in various episodes, remains the perpetual voice of reason, but with a sort of naivete to his character where he is almost unable to see a lot of what is happening around him. And this carries over to every single character in the show. Lindsay remains the vain, materialistic woman who stands for causes whenever those causes benefit her. Tobias is the ill-witted wannabe actor with a questionable sexuality. George Michael remains the straight-laced and awkward boy that he begins the show as. These characters do not change, nor do they learn to adhere to the normal American family values that sitcoms tended towards. Which is fascinating given the landscape in which Arrested Development launched. As we talked about in the intro to this video, early to mid-2000s television was rife with reality TV. But it wasn't only this that Arrested Development stood out from. The sitcoms of the late 90s and early 2000s were dominated by the likes of Friends, Everybody Loves Raymond, Scrubs, and That 70s Show. These shows and others like them all showcase some form of family-friendly values. These same values were what had similarly pervaded the landscape of the 1980s and in turn influenced the direction of Seinfeld. However, in the grander context of this era, television was influenced in a massive way by the events of September 11th, 2001. Now, I don't want to go on about a tragedy that still causes loads of mental and emotional anguish for people, but I feel I would be doing this video a disservice to not mention it. The event was a sort of booster shot that caused the country to come together for a common cause, something that it had not been able to do in quite a long time. The event itself, the war that followed, and the overall feelings of patriotism and togetherness definitely had an effect on the way television at the time felt. By the time that Arrested Development debuted in late 2003, however, sentiments were beginning to change around the war in Iraq. Alongside the Iraq War, the recent trend of corporate scandals like the likes of Enron and Adelphia had worn on the American people. Although many sitcoms of the era were actively trying to cheer up the country, Arrested Development was holding up a mirror and saying, "Isn't this funny?" With the entire nation looking to come together, Arrested Development was showcasing a family that was actively breaking apart. When you really look at how that show was actively deconstructing the family unit during a time of crisis, it's kind of amazing just how much it echoes what Seinfeld was doing in the late 80s and early 90s. While Arrested Development was taking an active and oftentimes critical look at interpersonal relationships of family members during a time of connection, Seinfeld was drawing a critical lens towards societal interpersonal relationships in the era of Reagan, Bush Sr., and the upper middle class. There are a myriad of things that you can look to showcase this as well. Just look at the entire premise behind the episode The Contest. Masturbation was a taboo subject that just was not discussed, and there Seinfeld was, discussing it. Or how about the two-part episode The Raincoats, where Seinfeld discusses the entire concept of the personal bubble? This, again, was something that polite society wasn't really bringing together as a topic of discussion. But to really dig into this, and why all of that matters, I want to talk about the character that maybe exemplified this better than anyone. I, of course, want to talk about George Costanza. George Costanza is arguably the most beloved character in Seinfeld, which is a little strange if you consider just how bad of a person George actually is. As I said before, George is a liar. He is manipulative, and he'll do whatever he can do to get ahead. He will often put himself into elaborate schemes that fall apart and hurt not only himself, but also others around him. What's even more incredible about the character, however, is that despite insight into his upbringing, not much changes in how we feel about him. Almost from the word go, George is a bad person without much context given as to why his neuroses have manifested, just that they have. As the series progresses, however, we gain little bits of insight into George, and we come to garner the full picture of what helped to shape him into the person we see before us. There's actually a really great interview in the behind-the-scenes specials found on the Seinfeld box sets where Jerry Seinfeld summarizes the character up.
George never felt guilty that he was trying to cheat someone because he had already been cheated. As far as he was concerned, he was just getting a small amount back from the casino that had already totally emptied out his bank account.
In the modern day, looking at how someone became the way that they did in order to empathize with them has become the norm. Just take a look at Cruella, Joker, Maleficent, or Wicked as examples of this trend. In a lot of ways, the little snippets of interactions between George and his parents, or George and someone from his past, were well ahead of their time in this regard. The interesting thing, however, is that he is unique in that the insights change very little in how we feel about him. We start the series seeing the person that George is, and we still end with that same picture despite the gained insight. Perhaps what makes George such an incredibly important character is that he is the perfect example of what Seinfeld is really about, and that is the deep dive into the minutiae of everyday interactions between people. Take just one look at any given episode of Seinfeld, and this is readily apparent. Take, for example, the episode The Marine Biologist. It is an episode that is almost entirely about impressions. The main plot involving George centers around his inability to tell the truth around a high school crush about his career path. He instead has to live a lie in order to garner a better impression from her. Elaine's plotline revolves around the impression she is trying to make with a famous author in order to get him to sign a book deal, a task that she fails at repeatedly. Or how about The Stall, an episode that's all about artificiality. The Elaine plot involves an extremely cool and attractive guy that she is seemingly dating purely because of his appearance. Jerry's plotline involves his seemingly nice girlfriend who refuses to help Elaine with some toilet paper in a public bathroom stall, only to find out that she is a phone sex operator, which ties in completely with Kramer's storyline. Or maybe we can take a look at The Big Salad, where George makes a big deal of his girlfriend seemingly getting credit for the salad that he bought Elaine. And every episode is like this, deconstructing these little notions about day-to-day life. What happens when you lie to impress someone? Why is the first impression such a big deal? What happens when you date a woman who isn't who she claims to be? What if she ends up being mortal enemies with your best friend? These are all questions that Seinfeld made a habit of asking, going so far as to make plot lines that involve such superficial debates as whether or not it is acceptable to pick your nose, or whether or not women know what happens to the male anatomy when the weather is on the colder side. It's these minor and, by most accounts, meaningless interactions that the show really liked to explore. Seinfeld always held a mirror up to society asking, do you see how ridiculous everyday life is? And it is. Life and every interaction that you find yourself in is just a little bit preposterous when you think about it. And the same can be said about the interactions between families, as noted in Arrested Development. And I think it's because of this that I was drawn to these two shows in the first place. And it's no coincidence that I found them in my formative teenage years. I'm not going to bore you with all the gory details, but it's needless to say that I didn't enjoy life during high school. I didn't understand it. I wasn't exactly the most, outgoing kid, and I was bullied often because of that. And the social dynamics within my family weren't much better. I love and still do love my mom and sister, but to phrase it nicely, I didn't exactly understand my father's approach to parenting. I didn't understand how my grandparents seemingly preferred other grandchildren over me and my sister. And it's because of this that I found this sort of insanity in everything. Why exactly was it that this kid was more well-liked than me when we had similar interests? Why did it matter that the age or really even value of your car made you any different from this person? Why was it that family members treated other family members better when you were all part of the same family? I asked questions like this in my head constantly. And when I went looking for the answers, oftentimes what I found was a completely arbitrary answer. I'm not saying that I had figured out the absurdity of life and existence as a teenager. I still don't have those things figured out. In fact, I still find things in my everyday life that strike me as like actual insanity. But what I am saying is that I often felt alienated and alone. I had no real place to turn and express these ideas or feelings. And it was during this time when I needed to know that I wasn't alone in finding the minutiae of everyday life crazy that I found Arrested Development and Seinfeld. And these two shows made me feel like I wasn't alone. It's why I think they're special, and it's one of the reasons that they remain atop my list of sitcoms after all this time. I'm in no way trying to insinuate that Arrested Development and Seinfeld are these philosophical musings on life. I kind of don't think that they are. But when I sit and think about what these shows mean to me, it's kind of hard not to draw those personal connections. It's been over 15 years since I ran across either Arrested Development or Seinfeld, and I've watched them countless times since. I can recite lines from them that make absolutely no sense out of context, but they never fail to make me chuckle. Even if I haven't seen an episode in months or hell, even years, if I hear a quote or a snippet from either show, my ears immediately perk up and I'm ready to sit and converse about them. Hell, it's kind of why I made this video. There might be better shows out there. There might be shows that have hit me harder emotionally. There might have been shows that have dazzled me more with their spectacle. But it's the excellent writing of Arrested Development and Seinfeld that will always stay with me. It's why they've stuck with me. And it's why I think they're the two best written sitcoms of all time. Hello friends, thank you so much for watching this video. It's been an exhausting labor of love, and I hope that you now see why I love these two shows so much. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and share it with others you think might enjoy it. I have more videos in the works, so if you'd like to see those when they release, consider subscribing. If you'd like to hear more of me and my thoughts, go check out Hunting Pixels, a video game podcast that I host with two friends. I think that's all for now, so take care of yourselves, and I'll see you all next time.